The morning sunlight slanted through the tall, arched windows of Washington County Courthouse, striking the worn wooden benches in golden rectangles. The air smelled of polished wood, old paper, and something metallic that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Today, as always, the courthouse was full of people who had no idea what they were about to witness. Reporters shuffled their papers, cameras clicked, and the faint hum of whispering voices filled the cavernous room. But this morning, everything shifted the moment the double doors at the far end creaked open. Daniel Maguire entered. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, his hands at his sides, his head high, eyes sharp and calculating. Unlike any other defendant Hawthorne had presided over in his long career, Daniel carried with him a presence that warped the air around him. His reputation had preceded him, a man who had tangled with the system in ways that defied logic, a man who filed civil claims against judges, prosecutors, and a slew of unnamed officials, and a man who never ever yielded. Today, he walked into the courtroom without shackles, having successfully argued that his constitutional rights allowed him the freedom to stand or sit as he pleased. This display alone sent ripples of tension through the courtroom. Judge Theodore Hawthorne, known for his steel-like composure and a gaze that could cut through stone, entered moments later. Every eye followed him, yet none dared to break Daniel's stare. For the first few seconds, time itself seemed to hesitate. Daniel raised a hand, not in surrender, not in greeting, but almost as if he were marking his territory. "Mr. Maguire," Hawthorne said, voice calm but edged with authority. "Please be seated." Daniel remained standing. A hush fell across the room, broken only by the faint shuffle of papers in the prosecutor's binder. "Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice steady and deliberate, "I will not be seated. I do not recognize the legitimacy of these proceedings, and I insist the record reflect my objection to this entire hearing." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters exchanged glances, some of them furiously scribbling notes. The judge's eyebrow lifted ever so slightly, the only visible sign of his inner irritation. He had seen many defendants attempt theatrics, but Daniel was not performing. He was asserting, with calm ferocity, his version of reality. Hawthorne leaned back slightly in his chair. "Noted, Mr. Maguire. Your objections are denied. This court recognizes your statements, but will proceed according to established procedure." Daniel's lips curled into a faint, ironic smile. "Of course, Your Honor. Predictable as always." Assistant Prosecutor Emily Carter stood, adjusting the strap of her binder nervously. She had faced difficult defendants before, but none who seemed to wield chaos as effortlessly as Daniel. "Your Honor," she began, "the people are ready to proceed and submit that the defendant has engaged in repeated obstruction, delaying tactics, and motions that are either frivolous or legally incoherent." Daniel tilted his head slightly, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Obstruction, delay. You speak as if these are crimes rather than survival mechanisms. You may proceed, of course, but know that the law itself will not shield you from scrutiny." Carter's eyes narrowed. She wasn't accustomed to having the target of her prosecution lecture her in such a tone. "Mr. Maguire, this court will not be lectured." "Then listen, Ms. Carter," Daniel interrupted softly, "because you will not understand the first time. The charges, the filings, the fabricated reports, they are all attempts to bury the truth. And the truth cannot be buried in this room or in any room where I stand." The judge's hand hovered over the gavel. "Mr. Maguire, I will tolerate decorum, but not defiance. Sit down immediately or face removal from this proceeding." Daniel's smile deepened. "Removal? Removal? Is that what you think you can do to me? I stand here not because I challenge authority, Your Honor, but because authority has challenged me first. Every charge against me, every motion denied, every report altered, it is all predicated on the assumption that I will break. I do not break." The room held its breath. The deputies shifted uneasily, aware that the situation was no longer routine. A single misstep could escalate beyond control. Daniel continued, his voice calm, yet imbued with a tension that suggested danger. I have filed civil claims against judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officials, and clerks. Some names you will not recognize, some you will. But each action stems from the same principle. I will not allow my rights to be trampled, nor will I allow false narratives to supplant the truth. Hawthorne inhaled slowly. He had dealt with self-represented defendants before, but Daniel's confidence was something entirely different. Mr. Maguire, he said evenly, you have been advised repeatedly about the perils of representing yourself. You are entitled to counsel, and this court will provide an attorney to ensure fairness. Do you wish to proceed with counsel or represent yourself? Daniel's gaze did not waver. I seek assistance, Your Honor, not simply to navigate procedure, but to ensure that the record is clear, that every deception is noted, and that the truth survives. I will accept counsel, yes, but not at the expense of my autonomy. Carter interjected, Your Honor. May I remind the court that the charges include fleeing and eluding, operating without a valid license, and unlawful escape from custody? Daniel's expression hardened. The escape charge is particularly absurd. I was hospitalized, not incarcerated. Yet somehow, through some clerical fiction, I am now charged with escaping lawful custody. When the law bends to narrative rather than reality, it becomes fiction, and I am here to expose it. The judge's hand clenched briefly around the gavel. Charges are noted. We will address each count during the preliminary examination. Today we focus on ensuring that discovery is provided, motions are filed, and due process is observed. This court will not be manipulated by theatrics. Daniel's smile returned, faint but unnerving. Manipulated? I merely insist on truth. You, on the other hand, insist on procedure over justice. There is a difference. The prosecutor shuffled papers aggressively, trying to regain control. Your Honor, the defendant has requested all discovery, including digital footage, officer statements, and interdepartmental communications. Some of these materials are not yet available due to procedural delays. Daniel leaned forward, intensity radiating from every word. Procedural delays are deliberate. I will not accept partial truths, nor will I allow my rights to be eroded by time and bureaucracy. Every officer involved must be cross-examined. Every report must be scrutinized. Every motion I file must be heard. That is my right under the Constitution, and it will not be denied. Hawthorne exhaled slowly, realizing that this hearing would not proceed as any normal court session had before. Mr. Maguire, the preliminary examination will be set for August 19th. You will receive all discovery prior to that date. You will have counsel appointed to you, and you will abide by courtroom rules until then. Is that understood? Daniel nodded, but his gaze swept across the room like a predator assessing a battlefield. Understood. But know this, no rule, no judge, no law can erase what happened that night. The truth will emerge, and those who attempt to conceal it will face consequences far beyond these walls. The courtroom held its collective breath. Daniel's words were not empty threats. They carried weight, a promise, and a warning. The deputies led him back to his seat, but the room had already changed. The balance of power, previously assumed, had shifted. Outside, reporters whispered to one another, scribbling furiously. They had not just witnessed another hearing. They had witnessed the arrival of a man who would bend the courtroom to his will, not by law, but by sheer force of conviction and intellect. And everyone, from the judge to the prosecutors to the gallery, knew that the coming days would not be ordinary. Daniel Maguire leaned back in his chair, eyes closed briefly, imagining the night that had started this chain of events. The flash of headlights, the sudden terror, the hospitalization, and the series of charges that had transformed him from a man into a symbol of defiance, a symbol of truth contorted by bureaucracy and fear. He opened his eyes and smirked faintly. The war had just begun. The courthouse felt heavier that afternoon, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension from Daniel Maguire's morning confrontation. Every step he took echoed like a hammer striking iron, reverberating through the polished floors, warning everyone present that today would not be a normal proceeding. The gallery, which had buzzed with curiosity, had quieted to a tense hush. Even the air smelled different, thicker, as if the truth Daniel carried was palpable and oppressive. Pressing down on every corner of the room, Assistant Prosecutor Emily Carter cleared her throat and stood again, gathering herself like a general mustering troops before battle. She flipped open her binder, but the sight of Daniel sitting upright, hands folded, eyes scanning the courtroom with that same unshakable composure, made her pause. He didn't fidget. He didn't shift uncomfortably. He simply observed, and in that observation he seemed to command. "Your Honor," Carter began, trying to regain her authority, "we are here to address multiple charges against the defendant. Count 1, fleeing and eluding officers in the 4th degree. Count 2, operating an unregistered vehicle. Count 3, operating without security. Count 4, operating with a suspended, revoked, or denied license. Count 5, refusal to obey lawful orders. And in the second case, additional charges include operating while intoxicated and the alleged escape from lawful custody." Daniel's lips twitched into that familiar, faint, ironic smile. He slowly raised a finger, pausing deliberately before speaking. "Interesting," he said, soft, yet carrying a weight that made Carter flinch. "Count 1, fleeing and eluding. Do you really expect anyone to believe I eluded when I was driving not from officers, but from death itself? Count 2 and 3, the unregistered vehicle and lack of security. Do you understand that the vehicle in question was under emergency care, and that your statutes assume ordinary circumstances, which do not exist in my case?" The judge leaned forward, fingers interlaced, watching Daniel closely. "Mr. Maguire, your objections will be addressed, but today we must proceed with clarity. Count 4 and 5, as well as your alleged escape from lawful custody, will be examined in detail during the preliminary examination. Please present your arguments clearly and concisely." Daniel's gaze flicked toward the gallery, then back to the judge. "Concisely, Your Honor? Allow me a moment of storytelling. The escape from custody, for example, is a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. I was in a hospital bed, incapacitated, subjected to observation. No officer had me in handcuffs. No. Jail existed in that room. Yet somehow, through clerical manipulation, I am charged with escaping lawful custody. Does your system truly believe the public will accept that?" A murmur ran through the gallery. Even Carter's composed demeanor cracked. She swallowed, then spoke again. "Mr. Maguire, the reports state—" "I know what the reports state," Daniel interrupted. "I have read every report, every note, every line. And I can tell you where they are falsified, where the narrative bends, and where the officers' testimonies were fabricated. The state relies on assumption and narrative, not facts." Judge Hawthorne raised a hand to silence him, but his voice was tinged with respect, unspoken yet undeniable. "Mr. Maguire, your argument will be noted. This court recognizes the complexity of the charges, but we will not allow proceedings to become a debate of philosophical correctness. Present your objections and evidence accordingly." Daniel leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. "Philosophy? No, Your Honor. This is survival. And the charges are not philosophical. They are punitive measures against truth itself. Count 1, fleeing and eluding. Do you know why that night began? Do you know what caused me to drive in such a manner? The public does not, and the officers conveniently omit the cause in their reports. Let me clarify. A silhouette appeared. On the road, a figure unidentifiable, yet lethal in its implication. My vehicle swerved to avoid impact. I did not flee officers. I fled death. And that distinction is lost in your statutes." Carter's binder slammed shut. "Objection! That is speculative and irrelevant. Relevant. Daniel shot back. Relevant is the truth, Ms. Carter. Truth is the only relevance in this courtroom, and it is precisely that relevance you wish to deny. Hawthorne's gavel hovered. Sustained in part. Mr. Maguire, you may not speculate on unverified events in this forum. However, you may provide factual evidence during the preliminary examination. Daniel's smirk never left his face. Very. Well, but allow me a brief recounting of the events that your officers verified as eluding law enforcement. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table, voice steady but escalating in intensity. I was driving, yes. I had consumed no alcohol beyond a minimal threshold that your tests erroneously amplified. I was aware of the officer's presence behind me, but I did not attempt to flee in criminal intent. I was transported to a hospital not by choice, but due to injuries sustained when another car struck mine in an event conveniently absent from your reports. Once at the hospital, I was placed under observation. No handcuffs, no formal arrest, no charges communicated. And yet, magically, the law transformed my recovery into criminality. This is the foundation of your case, transformation of truth into fiction. The judge made a subtle note, glancing briefly at the clerk. He had read every page, every report, every motion Daniel submitted. But there was something about the way Daniel spoke the clarity of logic, amid chaos, that unnerved even the most seasoned observer. Your Honor, Daniel continued, Count 4, operating while my license was suspended, denied or revoked, is similarly invalid. At the time alleged, my license had not been formally revoked. Notification was never delivered. Proof of knowledge, as required by statute, does not exist. And yet, the charge remains, as if your system assumes guilt before evidence. Is this justice or procedural theater? Carter attempted to interject, voice rising. Mr. Maguire, the statute clearly? Daniel's voice cut through her words like a knife. Clearly it assumes facts not in evidence. Clearly it presumes guilt. Clearly it attempts to entrap the unwary. The judge's fingers drummed lightly on the bench. Enough, Mr. Maguire. Your points are heard. Counsel will be appointed. Evidence will be provided. Cross-examination will occur during the preliminary examination. Procedural rights will be preserved. Daniel's gaze swept across the courtroom, resting momentarily on each officer, each clerk, each reporter. Procedural rights, he echoed softly. They are nothing without enforcement. And enforcement is absent when truth is malleable. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. Mr. Maguire, your preliminary examination is set for August 19th. All discovery, including officer reports and digital evidence, will be provided prior to that date. Counsel will be assigned. Is that understood? Daniel nodded. Understood. But know this, Your Honor. The truth I carry cannot be bound by dates or counsel. It exists independently of your calendar. And when that truth is revealed, the charges against me, fabricated as they are, will collapse under the weight of reality. A low murmur swept through the gallery. The deputies exchanged glances, knowing the man before them was no ordinary defendant. Carter's knuckles whitened on the binder. The judge remained stoic, yet inwardly he felt a tremor of unease. Daniel paused, then spoke again softer, almost to himself. And what they do not realize is that this is not just about me. It is about every manipulation, every cover-up, every alteration of reports that the public will never see. I carry that record now. I am the living archive of the truth they wish to erase. Outside the courtroom, the city seemed oblivious, but inside every corner, every witness, every participant felt the tension crackling like static electricity. Daniel Maguire had transformed the courtroom into a battlefield of intellect, law, and raw human determination. And everyone, judges, prosecutors, deputies, and observers understood that the coming preliminary examination would be no ordinary procedure. Even as he sat down, calm and composed, the shadow of the night that had initiated this chaos loomed over him. The headlights, the sudden threat, the hospital, and the fabricated charges, each a piece of a puzzle that Daniel intended to assemble, exposing systemic corruption and falsehood. And with every word, every motion, every deliberate pause, he reminded the court he was not just a defendant. He was the storm, the truth, and the reckoning all at once. The courthouse had grown colder by mid-afternoon, as if the shadows had conspired to gather in the corners of the room. Daniel Maguire sat at the defense table, surrounded by the silent tension of anticipation. The appointed public defender shuffled papers, clearly nervous, yet the uncertainty was nothing compared to the weight of Daniel's presence. He wasn't just a man, he was a force, a storm that could not be contained by procedure or law. "Your Honor," Daniel began, voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Before we continue, I request the record reflect my objection to the sufficiency of discovery provided. The digital evidence, the officer's statements, and the interdepartmental communications are incomplete. They have been selectively compiled to favor the prosecution's narrative rather than factual reality." The judge nodded, but his expression remained firm. "Mr. Maguire, the court has ensured that all discovery will be provided prior to the preliminary examination. Your counsel may review the materials upon receipt. Objections regarding sufficiency will be addressed at that time." Daniel tilted his head slightly, smirking faintly. "Understood. But know this, insufficient discovery is not merely a procedural oversight. It is a deliberate act of obfuscation, and I will treat it as such in every motion I file and in every argument I present." The prosecutor, Emily Carter, straightened in her seat, her patience fraying. "Your Honor, the defendant has filed over 20 motions, many of which are irrelevant or frivolous. This appears to be a tactic to delay proceedings." Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and piercing. "Frivolous? Not at all. Every motion I submit is a mirror held to your office, reflecting errors, inconsistencies, and omissions. Delay? If the truth takes time to reveal itself, then yes, it is a delay. But it is a necessary delay, a delay for justice." Hawthorne's fingers drummed on the bench, betraying the subtle tension he usually masked so well. "Mr. Maguire, this court recognizes your right to file motions. However, they must comply with procedural rules and statutes. You are reminded that deliberate obstruction will not be tolerated." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Deliberate obstruction? You mistake persistence for obstruction. I do not obstruct. I illuminate. I do not delay. I expose. Every procedural maneuver I employ is designed not to frustrate the court, but to compel adherence to truth and law. Consider my first motion, dismissal of the escape from custody charge. Factually impossible, legally untenable, and procedurally deficient. Yet it was filed to ensure the record reflected reality. That is not obstruction. That is accountability." The judge raised an eyebrow, but did not interrupt. Daniel's public defender, a young attorney named Lisa Prester, fidgeted with her notes, clearly aware that her client's intellect and precision were several steps ahead of her own. She looked to the judge, as if seeking reassurance, but Hawthorne's expression remained unreadable. "And what of your civil claims, Mr. Maguire?" Carter asked, her voice sharp. "You have filed complaints against multiple officials, judges, and officers. Are these intended to influence your criminal proceedings?" Daniel's smile returned faint but unsettling. "Influence? No. They are intended to document misconduct and preemptively protect my constitutional rights. The court seems to believe that filing claims is an attempt at manipulation. Perhaps it is. But it is also the exercise of the same rights guaranteed to every citizen. Filing against parties for violations of civil rights is not a maneuver. It is the law, and it is my law." Carter's face tightened, the edges of frustration visible. "Your Honor, these filings are irrelevant to the charges at hand and may prejudice proceedings. I request the court limit discussion of civil claims." In this forum, Hawthorne's gaze shifted between Daniel and Carter. Noted. However, Mr. Maguire may assert his rights, provided he does so within the confines of procedural rules. Civil claims will be addressed separately, but may be referenced where relevant to criminal proceedings. Daniel leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing as he began to outline his next argument. Count 2 and 3, operating without registration and security, also merit dismissal. The vehicle in question was under emergency care, as documented in hospital reports and insurance records. It was not, at the time, subject to standard registration enforcement. Yet your system conflates circumstance with crime. I submit that. Factual error alone invalidates these charges. The judge's pen paused above his notepad. Mr. Maguire, the court will note your objections. Documentation will be reviewed. A determination will be made during the preliminary examination. Daniel's voice dropped, soft but resonant. And yet, Your Honor, the preliminary examination itself is a double-edged sword. It promises scrutiny, yet the officers involved are not present, reports are incomplete, and evidence has been delayed. If the court proceeds without completeness, then justice is compromised before it begins. I request not merely to examine, but to inspect to see the officers, to verify the footage, to ensure procedural fairness in both letter and spirit. My rights under the 6th and 14th Amendments are not suggestions, they are guarantees. Hawthorne exhaled, realizing that this hearing would not follow the familiar rhythm of standard cases. Daniel had transformed the courtroom into a chessboard, each move precise, calculated, and anticipatory. Every objection, every motion, every word was part of a larger strategy to expose the systemic flaws, the misreporting, the selective enforcement, and the bureaucratic negligence that had compounded into the charges before him. Your Honor, Daniel continued, the escape charge, the fleeing and eluding, the operating with a suspended license, they are all on their faces, facially, invalid when reviewed with proper context. I have documentation, witness testimony, hospital records, and forensic evidence that contradict the official narrative. If the court proceeds without acknowledgement of these facts, it is complicit in perpetuating falsehoods. And I will hold this court accountable. The deputies shifted uneasily. Even seasoned officers who had seen unruly defendants were unsettled by Daniel's calm authority. Carter pinched the bridge of her nose, realizing that standard prosecutorial tactics, assertion, repetition, and pressure were ineffective. Daniel's strategy was not simply defense. It was offense. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick binder labeled Exhibit A, Chronology of Factual Events. He opened it carefully, sliding the pages across the table. Each document was meticulously organized. Hospital intake forms, paramedic reports, digital logs, interdepartmental memos. These, he said, voice steady, represent the reality. Your reports omit. Consider this not as defiance, but as preservation. Preservation of truth, which is in itself a duty of this court. Carter attempted a protest. Your Honor, the defendant is attempting to overwhelm the court with extraneous documents. Overwhelm? Daniel interrupted softly. I provide evidence, not rhetoric. If presenting facts overwhelms the court, perhaps the issue lies with the court, not with me. Consider this. Procedural delay, selective evidence, and misreporting have already overwhelmed justice. I merely counterbalance with the truth. Hawthorne scribbled notes but said nothing, acutely aware that Daniel's arguments were both legally grounded and rhetorically devastating. Moreover, Daniel continued, leaning forward, I have filed civil complaints not out of whim, but out of necessity. Judges, prosecutors, clerks, each has participated actively or passively in the alteration, suppression, or misreporting of evidence. Each complaint documents actions or inactions that affect not just me, but the integrity of the judicial process. While these claims are separate from criminal proceedings, they are relevant insofar as they reveal the context in which the current charges were constructed. Carter's jaw tightened. Mr. Maguire, this is irrelevant. The criminal case will proceed independently. Civil filings do not negate the validity of charges. Daniel's gaze hardened. Irrelevant? They are the framework. Without acknowledging the context, every proceeding is a fiction, a charade, and that charade is what you call justice. I call it manipulation. You may proceed with your claims, but understand that each motion I submit is informed by these truths, and I will not allow procedural fear to supplant reality. The gallery was silent, mesmerized. Whispers floated. He's smart, dangerous. Even the court reporters. Fingers paused mid-transcription. Sensing the extraordinary weight of the moment, the judge leaned forward, gavel in hand. Mr. Maguire, your requests are noted. Counsel will review your motions. Evidence will be provided. The preliminary examination is set. This court will proceed in accordance with rules, and your civil filings will be considered separately. Daniel nodded, calm, almost serene. Very well. But know this, the court cannot shield itself from the consequences of ignoring truth. Every misrepresentation, every omission, every false report, all will be accounted for, and I will see to it personally that justice, in its purest form, is observed. Procedural compliance alone is insufficient. As the hearing adjourned for the day, Daniel gathered his binders, the weight of the truth pressing against every page. He had moved chess pieces, not merely in defense, but in preparation for the full battle ahead. The preliminary examination would not be ordinary. Every motion, every document, every argument was now part of an intricate design, exposing the truth, challenging authority, and demanding accountability. Outside, the courthouse buzzed with the tension left in his wake. Reporters whispered to each other, deputies exchanged glances, and even the judge paused, acutely aware that Daniel Maguire was no ordinary defendant. He was the storm that had already begun, and the eye of the hurricane had yet to arrive. Daniel walked slowly, deliberately, toward the elevator. Each step echoed like a promise. The fight was just beginning. In the courtroom, the officials and the public had yet to comprehend the scale of what was coming. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows, cutting through the tension that had hung heavy in the previous sessions. Daniel Maguire entered the courtroom with the same deliberate calm he had maintained for weeks. But today, there was a sharper edge in his gaze, a mixture of anticipation and quiet fury. The room seemed smaller, charged as if the walls themselves leaned in to witness the battle about to unfold. Today was not merely a hearing. Today was the stage where truth, law, and defiance would collide with unprecedented force. The gallery was packed. Reporters perched on the edges of their seats. Cameras clicking, microphones poised. Everyone had heard of Daniel Maguire by now, the man who defied convention, who challenged authority, who filed civil suits against officials with surgical precision. Yet nothing could prepare anyone for the intensity of his presence when he rose to speak. Judge Theodore Hawthorne entered, his usual measured pace replaced by a perceptible gravity. He had read every motion, every objection, every report, and yet he understood that Daniel's mastery of the courtroom was not merely legal, it was psychological. He could manipulate the air, bend perception, command attention without shouting, and had done so every step of the way.